Hey, DeRacers. So in the previous video, we unveiled the new tool. And today what we wanted to do is to dive in very specifically to the classification portion of said tool. And so that way you can get a little bit of insight of the backstory and whatnot. Now, when I bring this in, I want to just first point out that we wanted to build this classification tool because obviously the great horses were dominating and a lot of the other horses had to get benched. And we wanted to create an ability that we could figure out what is a reasonable bracket system so that everybody can compete in their appropriate leagues. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's something that we've probably all, if you've watched our videos, we've alluded to this fact that horses are really hard to quantify how good they are, right? And so we wanted to create, like you said, a bracket system, or I think of it as like buckets that horses fall into, right? Like we want to understand not only our own horses and our stable, but how we compare to other horses that are out on the field.
Mm-hmm. Now we collaborated with other builders that are hosting events like the Dirk Army guys and SMR, and what we wanted to try to do was to figure out what is the best and most reasonable metric that shows what a horse can do, the caliber of the horse. That's also the most difficult to manipulate or to cheat.
Mm-hmm.
And so to us, PPR was immediately thrown out the window just because PPR with you could get a high roller race and your PPR could skyrocket, or you could run into a bunch of champions and just have a terrible PPR, but you might have just been outside the loop. And ultimately, we came down to the indisputable and weighted win rate are the two most reasonable metrics because indisputable will show you what your historical paces have performed. But even if you run slow and your horse has the competitive spirit to still push ahead and get to the front, the weighted win would show that kind of elements to it. So combining those is ultimately what we are using for in this classification.
Yeah, so now if you don't mind, let's move the screen over a little bit and we're going to take a look at the upper right corner. Um, you'll see that we have a rating key over here, and this is just a really quick understanding of how we catalog or categorize these different classifications. The what you just explained, the indisputable and the weighted win rate are two percentages. And when you multiply those two together, so let's say you had a 20% indisputable and a 20% weighted win, when you multiply those two together, you get a really tiny, tiny little number. And when you take that and try to plot that out on a scale, sometimes you have to add a multiplier to create a little better sense of where that falls. So rather than getting into multiple decimal points, we wanted to quantify it in a way that could be put onto a scale that is essentially starting at 0 and moving its way up to 17 plus. And that's where the R column shows you that an X rating is basically 0 to 4. And then you've got D's that are 4 to 8, C's that are 8 to 10.5, and then A's that are 10.5 to 17. Now, the vast majority of horses are going to fall between X and C. But when you move up past C, you actually have a decent period where if you are a B level horse, you're going to sit in that bracket for a very long time. And the reason this exists is we have essentially created a sloped scale that as you go past 17 on this points, you're going to quickly climb, right? An A-level horse that is a 17 can quickly become an A-level horse that's a 25 or a 30 in the back end. And that's, again, due to that multiplier. So that's the reason why you see it kind of scaling itself up quickly as you go from 0 to 17 plus on these different classifications.
Perfect. Now, the other thing is that this requires 30 starts. You'll notice it here, the 30 starts racing. And then you'll notice to the right of this, we have the same color code for D, C, B, and A, but you'll notice that there's diamonds that instead show the color for it. So I'm going to switch to my Adomas, and this is a horse that I've been training. So you'll notice I do not have anything here in the 5s. I started this horse by doing the vertical linear regression. I do my 5s test first. I was able to determine that the horse preferred turf. So then I quickly started moving in that direction. With the bad reaction, I started moving to the longer range. And I could see already that I have early indicators of a B trend, a D trend here. This one's not looking very good. Then I got A followed by another B and a C. So what's nice about this is that as you're assessing a horse, especially in the discovery state, like there's a lot happening. You win 2 races in a row, all of a sudden your weighted win, your PPR skyrockets, and you might think, oh, this is perfect. But what's nice about this is by taking both those values of indisputable and your weighted win rate, it helps try to stabilize some of these values to show you like the caliber of the horse is at least in this trajectory.
Yeah,
So
and
it
for
really helps.
example, here on your 14, sorry to talk over you there
Yeah.
for a minute. I just wanted to make sure that it's understood. When we put a diamond on there, it's to give you a sense of what, like you said, trajectory you're heading in. It's not necessarily that you're going to ultimately end up as a C on those 14s. It's just that you happen to currently have an 18% indisputable and an 18% weighted win rate. They're lining up with each other currently.
Mhm.
Which is nice. That is a strong indication that you will most likely end up somewhere around a C. But you've only done 7 runs.
Yeah.
You go on the 13s and you've done 9 runs, and that one's got wildly different values. You've got a 17% indisputable and a 27% weighted win rate. So it's actually most likely artificially altering the value to a B level because of that 27% win rate. But if you can keep that up, if that horse really does love to win
Mhm.
on these long distance turf tracks, you are going to end up with a B rating there.
Yep. And like as you said, like there's going to also always be opportunities to do other assessments. Like right now, this what is this? My 11 furlong on turf is currently trajectory to be an X. It's saying it's not your track. But 21 runs in there, I'm looking at linear regression. Sure, it's pretty close in line, but considering that I have pretty good performances to the left to my right, I'm going to probably hit those tracks a few more and see as I approach my 30 hits to get my true classification. I'm going to be hitting those a little bit longer.
And again, one of the reasons we love the way that this classification system has been set up and being able to use the combination of indisputable and weighted win is to be able to understand, did your horse go fast enough, which is where indisputable comes in? Like, is its time fast enough? But did it also have something extra, right? Like,
Mhm.
we've all seen it. There's horses out there that you're watching the race, your horse is way out in front. And then in the last little bit, the well-known horse, the one that we all know, right? It might be a Hungry Eyes, or it might be the C Word, or some of these other horses that are just incredible at closing in races, will just suddenly catch up and win. Now, their time may not have been worthy of a first place finish from an indisputable perspective. Their time might not have been, but they actually pulled off that first place win, and they get a benefit for that. So again, we're trying to capture a little bit of that competitiveness, that drive that some of the horses have at the very end of the race.
Now, this horse here, 4th place, is one of my Gen 1s from a previous tournament, currently in the hands of our developer who's doing testing for ARM. But this horse was a throwaway horse to me. But what's interesting is that it was losing everywhere I ever raced it. But since we've done the classification, to see that there's some indicators that are popping up. Now, if I was looking at just PPR, a 5 cent is not all that exciting. But honestly, this horse is probably not going to be very good. But seeing these early indicators of some positive, if that horse was back in my stable, I would definitely turn this thing on with ARM, hit a few more of those tracks and try to find it. But one of the most important elements that I have learned from using this tool as I switched, let's say, Skondert, is that Skondert, I know where to run. I've ran him so many times. But with B's, A's, and C's, it's essentially helping me set my Dirk range of where I want to go. We talked about ROI decay recently as new horses are appearing. Skondert's even getting pushed slower and slower back. A lot of Gen 1s are taking over turf. And you'll see that I've had a lot of Bs that are slowly turning into Cs now on turf as expected. And what that tells me is that I might want to no longer bet as aggressively. So I might
Mhm.
switch my C's to like a 1 Dirk range, my B's 2 to 3 Dirk comfortably. But like C's, there's a lot more assessment that needs to be done. If you have an A horse, it just anything you want to do, it will just keep printing you. But I would usually set those to the 3 Dirkers or the high Dirk range because
Yeah.
this has been a very good assessment of showing you where you should be racing and how much money you should be betting.
Yeah, so let's say you're looking at this, right? You want to understand where your horse should run and what the different letters mean, right? You kind of touched on it. A's, you can basically print money. You can do anything with an A. So if you've got a horse that's got a track or tracks, which is usually the case, if they can run A's, you're just going to set those and basically forget them. Get them into everything that is high value that you can, that is filling, that's going to get you a return. B's are where I get the most excitement, and that may be coming from someone who doesn't have a lot of good horses. But having B's show up is just like, oh yes, there's finally something that I can see as like an anchor track, right? Like I can actually use that as my profitability while I study other stuff. And that to me is fantastic. And then we have C's, and C's are really, quite honestly, where the game is being played. And it's going to require that you understand your horse, you understand things like indisputable and weighted win rates, understanding even podium rates and how that plays into your weighted win rate, being able to understand why it's a C rating and whether or not you can actually profit. Now, for me personally, I have some separate tools that we don't actually offer here, where I try to look at Dirk specific races, right? I've got some horses that might be a C that can't run on 2 Dirk races, but then I've got others that can only run on 2 Dirk races. And at the end of the day, this has to do with how many of the races are appearing, as well as how many different horses are going into each of those. So sometimes your C-level horse might be fringe in terms of PPR, but you move it up from a 1 Dirk to a 2 Dirk race, and now it suddenly starts making a better return. But the opposite can be true. You can have lots of really good horses in those 2 Dirk races, which means that you aren't going to see the same return because you just aren't getting on the podium as often. Those 3rd places are becoming 4th places. So that's things that you're going to have to play with. But again, that's where the C-level classification comes into play. And then finally, D's are basically, you shouldn't run them. I like to refer to D's as donkeys, but really at the end of the day, X's, anything D and below is something you shouldn't run. But that's one of the reasons why this classification system has been created. And I know you're going to enjoy talking about here in a second what we have that's going to be coming with regard to classification.
Mm-hmm. Now, yeah, exactly. So D's, we still want to create these. So if you go to that stable overview in the future, there will be D events, because we know there's going to be a lot of horses out there that are D that just no longer do anything. And our goal is to give you some action still. So you could go and compete with other D's, maybe have a chance of winning some good purses. Then the other element to this is if you have a bunch of X's. We've talked about trying to host a donkey death match. To me, if you have horses that are all D's and X's, those are wonderful candidates, especially if it's a Gen 1. Hopefully never a Gen 0. But those would be the horses where it's like, it's getting pushed out of the game. So you might as well go recycle it, go put it through a donkey death match, get some new rewards, and then go breed a new one and hope that you got a better foal.
Now, if you don't mind, scroll up real quick to the horse drop-down list. And I have a horse in here called Looks Like a Champ. And
Okay.
This is a new horse that we bred that we're trying to study. And I, again, if you guys have watched our videos, I use a slightly different discovery method than Vamp does. I use 5s and some longer distance track as well to try to create kind of a 2 anchor points to understand how good they are. And so I started with 5s and 11s on this particular horse. And it was fairly obvious to us initially that this horse was going to run synthetic. That was only because synthetic was better than turf and better than dirt. But at the end of the day, my 11s ended up being a false flag. I started them thinking, oh, this is going to be great. I can run somewhere between 5s and 11s. And then everything in between 5s and 11s became Ds. My 11s and 12s became X's. And then I expanded out, and my 13s are currently a B, which, for some of you, you may be looking at this going, well, this doesn't make any sense. Classification is just going to confuse me more. But it actually helps you, as you move through, quickly understand whether or not you need to move away from a zone of racing. So when I was starting in the middle there and doing 6 through 11, I did actually probably too many of them, right? Like I did over 30 on every single one of them to get the classification. But I probably could have seen 10, 15, 20 races in that I wasn't going to get a C or better grade here. And if that's the case, you need to start avoiding that section. And that's when I started to expand out the other direction. I went with 13s, 14s, 15s, and then went the other way with 4s, 3s, and 2s to try to see if this horse can do sprinting or long distance better. So that's where I'm at in my study. But again, the classification system gives me another way to look at this. I don't have to just look at indisputables and win percentages and things like that. I can instead look for letter grading.
Now, on the note of the letter grading too, something we want to make sure that it's very well understood and known. We are just members of the community here. We do not control anything. So we're not DeRace. We're not in charge of anybody. We are just our own club, and we just want to have a lot of fun. So when we made these classifications, we did our best to collaborate with others, but we are very, very open and expecting criticism, feedback, and suggestions. So what we have here in this tool, you might see it change in the next couple of weeks as more people use it and give us feedback. But we're going to be hosting these events where we want to test this out with other horses in said classifications. So that way we can get more people, hopefully, giving good feedback about this to maybe jack up more interest in getting some of these horses off the bench. And then if we get really good feedback, it's going to change, and we'll make sure that's updated and we share with you here. But please understand that this is not any law of the land by any stretch. This is purely our first step of trying to create a more fair bracketed event where we can host events and to inspire a lot more activity.
Just like we did when we created the original public analytics tool, we saw a gap and a need that the community was hoping to have, a way to analyze your horse, and we're doing it again. Like Vamp said, we're part of the community. We use these tools, and because we use them, we want to make them free to you guys to be able to take advantage of understanding your horse in the broader context of all horses that are out there. And this classification system is going to be a really fun way for us to start creating events and analyzing your horse. So please get out there, make a copy of the new tool, study the classification system, and see if it makes sense for your horses, if it falls in line with what you would expect, and then look for those events that will be coming.